Hello there. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing okay. Uh, so today I've got off from work, and I really wasn't feeling very motivated to do anything. I find that on my days off, now that I've been working, I'm just not that motivated to do anything because I'm on my feet most days, and you just kind of want to rest your feet. So. So what I mean is want to do something on my day off. Basically, do I want to go run? Do I want to clean? Do I want to do this? I'm sure everyone understands it. No one's gonna find any pity in their heart to give me, but that's the way I've been feeling. Um, so I did go for a run this morning. I felt a little bit better, although to be honest with you, it just it didn't go as well as planned. But I'm actually kind of glad that I went, even if it was somewhat of a bust. I probably got about 3 miles, and I just got tired. Oh, I just it was a struggle to breathe and all that. And I think that's largely because I haven't been running. So if you get out of the habit of running, then you basically you lose your ability along with that. So I'm glad that I went just because you can say, well, at least I did that. At least I made the bed. At least I did the dishes. And I have a couple of things I want to finish today, but it's actually good. It's a there's a way to be lazy and get things done. I think that if you just kind of promise yourself that you'll do this one thing or two things, then you can be lazy for the rest of the day, and make silly YouTube videos that hardly anyone watches. But I feel like if you at least get something done, then you can't really call it a waste of a day. Um, if you just sit on the couch and watch TV all day, then I have not done, that's bad, but I haven't done that since I was a teenager. So so anyway, so I was thinking about it the other day, and it's probably been about a little over 7 years since I started writing a blog. And my blog's mostly been um, about the great books of the Western world. Um, there are some minor variations in there that aren't part of this giant book collection that that I have. So this is an actual collection of books. It's not just something I've collected, like great books, but this is actually like a series called The Great Books of the Western World. There's 50 some volumes in it, and it ranges everyone. I think the first book is Homer, and the last one is William James. I think that was done deliberately so that I'm sure there are great thinkers after um, William James, but there was also a copyright issue. Some of these great authors, I think, when it was assembled in the 1950s, were still around, or at least their copyrights were still valid. So anyway, there's 50 some books. Like I said, there's Homer, there's Plato, Aristotle, there's St. Thomas Aquinas, there's uh, Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, Cervantes, Goethe, etc. And I've been sort of they have in the book that they've been following. They have this little plan listed, so you don't just get stuck in the ancient Greeks and then maybe you give up. You want a little bit of this and that. And their main theme of I think if you read the first volume is basically an explanation or an introduction to the series. And I don't know, it's about 150 pages. Um, and a few essays on the importance of how to read different texts, that you don't read a scientific work uh, like Fourier or something like that, and then read Plato in the same way. It's just not going to work. You're going to be frustrated. So you have to approach different styles of text in different ways, especially when you're approaching them for the first time. That's actually really important. And I wish it seems obvious, but it's only obvious um, after you experience it. You know, you experience all kinds of reading, and then so for example, you know, it only makes sense that you don't read the instruction manual on the TV the same way you would read Shakespeare. You're not looking for higher concepts. You're not looking for plot points when you're talking about setting up your TV. Particularly nowadays, that not, TVs are much more complicated. You need that instruction manual of know how to, you know, connect it to the internet and how to solve those problems. You're not going to read that the same way as you're going to read poetry or philosophical texts or, you know, religious literature. So I think that's actually really important, and I wish I'd, you know, at least been aware of this idea. Um, and the book, the first book, the introduction book, has a reading list of 10 years of reading this, and it flits around, so you're going through each, you know, each year, and it starts off with Plato, and it ends with maybe I think perhaps Karl Marx, and you can kind of see how each text is related to one another uh, when you go through the, you know, through the year. You say, oh, he's making a reference. You know, Plato makes a reference to Homer, right? Um, and so you can see that they're all sort of on the same page. If they're not on the same page, if they don't agree with each other, they're actually on the same, they're speaking the same language, at least, that they can actually have a conversation with us, with each other throughout time. Of course, that conversations can between someone like Homer and, let's say, St. Thomas Aquinas, they're not possible because, you know, they were probably about 2,000 years apart. But being familiar with these texts is you can see the development of Western thinking because a lot of these people read uh, same authors. Um, and so, you know, I read through these texts, at least the initial 3 years, I would say, of the reading list, and then I started going off the reading list. So I'm still reading the books on the reading list. I'm just not doing them in the order that they're on the list. And it seems like it's a little bit more fun. I might not have that play between each text because these were curated by professors um, that Encyclopedia Britannica conferred with. They said, well, why don't we do this? And there's a list of like maybe 100, 200 professors who were advising in this construction. And there's another thing in there, it's called Syntopicon, which is just totally like once you're done reading all these things, then you have to read the Syntopicon, which is basically like an index of ideas. So if you want to look up anywhere in this series the concept of romantic love, it'll give you a list of every single page, every single line that mentions a different type of love. There'll be subheadings on this love. It's almost like an encyclopedia, um, which makes sense. But it works in this sort of cross referencing. So you could see a list of, oh, that, you know, Plato talks about love in the Symposium, um, which is usually a romantic love. And then in this one, St. Augustine talks about his love for God. So this is more of a religious type love. And this one talks about love of one's parents and things like that. So you can cross reference them. And then they actually add different texts that aren't even in the series um, as a little bonus. So that's you would have to read all of these books, know them, and then go back and read sections of these books. I think it's amazing, and I hope I actually get to do that at some point because that's what's coming after the 10 years. So I've done this for 7 years now. I've actually only done 3 complete years, but I've done a ton of scattered little this and that. I've when we were living in England, I went, I didn't have all these books with me. I'd left them at my parents' house, and so I was just reading what I could get at an Oxfam. Oxfam is like a charity shop, and dotted throughout every single English town I I can't tell you how many Oxfams, probably more Oxfams than there are McDonald's. Um, but anyway, uh, I was able to get this book and that book, so I was going off the list, and it, you know, I found it to be kind of fun because you never know what kind of book you're going to find in an Oxfam. So if I'm reading this list, I'm sort of had to stop where I was and go find a book that happens to be on this list. Okay, you read oh, well, where can I, and you go to the Oxfam and you think, because their library system there was terrible. Otherwise, I would have done that. But Oxfam, these books are like, under £5. And, I remember getting John Milton and reading that. And it was, and I got the book for like £2. So it was kind of fun because you never knew what you were going to come across. But then again, you don't get that sort of dialogue in the conversation between John Milton making reference to maybe, Dante. Um, so you don't see them together. On the other hand, it is kind of fun to go, find what you can find. I don't buy books in bookstores, except for like used bookstores, because I like just tripping across. I like sort of the the occasion that you could just maybe find the book of your life at some point. It's a little more romantic than you going to look for a specific book. I just go into open to with open mind to bookshop and say, "All right, books, show me what you got." So anyway, the reason why I actually started the whole reading these books and making a blog about it, was because um, I would say that if I'm going to be honest, it was more about vanity than anything else. You know, a lot of people will use intelligence or experience as a form of vanity. That, or am I not so great because I read Moby Dick and I read Homer and I read this? Honestly, if I'm going to say it, it was a little bit of that. I'm not the kind of person who brags a lot, but I assume that yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a brag about being well read. And there's also it was also curiosity. If you read the Bible, then you start seeing what parts of our language from the Bible or concepts. Even if you're not a believer, you have to be aware of a lot of Bible things. The blind leading the blind, or um, you know, the promised land, or things like that, where you're just like, oh, even if you're not a believer, you know those. You have to know those if you speak English. So anyway, um, it was a little bit about that, but to me, it was always about a tool. This is more about me than it is about the books. And all of these books are trying to get to the truth. I've noticed that they're not really that meandering. They're not While a lot of them are very funny, like particularly Aristophanes, his plays are hilarious. They're weird, but they're fun. Um, I would say that a lot of these books, they're not they're not that entertaining. There are parts of it that are really like when I just done Saint Augustine in the Confessions. Uh, I think the series has it split up into two parts. We read the first half of the book about his conversion, and then the second half of his book. Well, the first part was about his life up to the conversion and the conversion, and afterwards he talks a lot about. It turns a little philosophical. Um, why do I believe? What does it mean to believe? What is God's love? That kind of stuff. Um, but there was a part of the story, the second part of the book, where Augustine's mother dies. And having gone through that recently, it was just, I actually cried while reading it. And his attitude towards it was just amazing. So anyway, like I noticed that at some point in reading this, something about me has changed. Something has changed in me, and I don't know when. I don't know how. I don't know what exactly. but these books have made a major effect, or cause a lot of change in me. They've so I would say it makes me ask the question: is it maturing with time and age, or have these books really made a lasting impact, a real impact? And I don't know. But what the books have done is made me feel small. I know that, here I was, the vanity in me wanted to puff myself up to make myself bigger. But I've noticed that the more I'm exposed to this, the more I feel small. Um, Yet I feel like I know a little bit more. So it seems, it seems like the more I grow, the smaller I feel. And actually, it's weird. It's like you're growing, you're getting bigger, but you feel small. Maybe it's just because you're now more aware of everything around you and the enormity of some of it. So anyway, I feel small, but I actually feel more at ease. That's weird. Um, and it's nice to have been exposed to a lot of different forms of thought. You've got history books in there, you've got literature, you've got religion, you've got philosophy. It's fun. And it's not so much a thing about having done a thing. Now, I would say that the idea of a fait accompli is a thing having been done, but it's a little bit, the term itself actually means a little bit more than that. But it's a nice to have a thing been done. It's like the experience of having done it and then the effect of it having done it, but you don't really enjoy the doing. In some of those cases, it's work. Um, but for me, I initially found it a little bit of work and it was a struggle. But I think somewhere along the line, as I kept at it and I kept at it, I noticed that I was able to read better. I was able to take better notes so that going back to the initial part of my blog, the notes are kind of sparse. They're not really focused. And I just, you know, I feel having grown and I find out what's more important in my reading. Um, and before it was a chore, and now it's more about the ride. Um, it's not so much about having done something; it's the doing of something. That's the in the process, the in the moment where you lose yourself. Like you kind of forget that you're a person reading a book, and it's just like a mind meld between you and the um, and the material. Um, and it's fun, that's it's kind of there's the immediate effect. It's not just the consequence of it. It's the continuous effect. Like you're going alongside, with this thing, and that's what's fun. Um, so and then you can see the cross references, and you can see how everything is just sort of, they reference, Shakespeare might reference, some of the history about Julius Caesar. And so you see these cross references, and so you'd have to understand what's going on, and or at least be familiar with some of these concepts. Uh, and sometimes, especially the older ones, you don't know the difference between fiction and fact when you're reading about, let's say, Herodotus, right? Herodotus, you don't know if any of that is true, if they're exaggerations, if they're just downright lies. There's no, you have no way of knowing which is, which part of it's bullshit and what isn't. But that's kind of fun. Um, but at least they're talking about things in the past. And so you see how it all of these works and all of this culture coming from a very similar area of like Europe and then obviously America and Australia and Canada, because we are the children of this. Um, I would say that you could see them weaving together where they might agree at this point and then they'll disagree with those. And so you get this sort of, I guess, helix or, you know, cross patterns. And It's really interesting to see where they argue with one another, where they agree with one another, and actually when you read one and then you read the other, you kind of think, wait a minute, these are displays of tension and conflict that just sort of envelop our entire society, and the history of our thought. A good example of this is like, for example, capitalism versus communism. You would say, well, here you have an argument between Marx and people like Adam Smith, John Locke, where they are speaking the same language. It's just that they disagree on the what's being said in that language, and that's quite interesting. Um, and so you could see another example. This is Plato. So Plato focuses on the forms. So you have, here's a mug of tea, and this mug has a lot, has all the essential elements of mugness to be called a mug. And what Plato is interested in is, well, what is that mugness? What is it that makes that mug a mug and not something else? Why does it qualify to be called a mug? And then you take another mug. You say, does this also have mugness? And you say, you don't even have a checklist for this, but somehow you know it's a mug, you know, or if it isn't a mug. And Aristotle was more about, well, the mugness in that is in the fact that it is a mug. It could take different shapes, but we have to take each individual occurrence of this as different. And there might be we could put them in the same category, and we can argue about the limits of that category. But it's all in the being. There's no like outside, actual different world where these mugs, the perfect or the most ideal, when they'll call it platonic, ideal of a mug is a mug. And there's this little everything qualifies as this. So, and it's just fun to be a fly on the wall when this is going on. It's really kind of, I would say, it's really kind of strange to think that I've read so many of these books and so many of these other books that aren't on this list, and it makes me kind of feel strange that I technically any reader today is probably better read than 99.99999% of all human beings who have ever existed. Um, and you know, for various reasons, obviously, most people back in the old caveman days, or I don't know how many of them lived in a cave, but most of them uh, couldn't read. They didn't even have an alphabet, uh, let alone uh, a written, basically literature. They didn't have any writing, um, a written alphabet, I suppose. So I would say that. Yeah, I mean, you were probably better read than Homer, which is amazing. You think about that, and you think, oh wow, I've read more books. I understand the world a little bit better than Homer. What, how does that make sense? And it's for somebody who's never, I've never written a book. How can it be that I understand more about this and that than one of the greatest writers? It's kind of weird, but it's true. So maybe we can't come up with anything original, but we can understand a lot more than what he can understand. And I guess that points to the what a lot of them call the divine spark in uh, in writers or in musicians or scientists. Something in them is causing them to do something rather than some sort of will. Um, and that's when they make great things. So anyway, it's just kind of fun to think about all this stuff. I would call it my hobby. I would call it my passion. I don't really feel passionate about it, but it's definitely such a a chunk of my life that I spend reading and thinking about what I've been reading and, keeping a blog of what I read, I feel like it's just made my life better. And if you're a curious person and you like learning things, I recommend it to anyone. So, anyway, that's about all. I've gone on too long, so I'll see you soon. Toodaloo.